Hello again, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about the other half of the traits for Legions Imperialis. Last time I had a quick chat about the ones for Loyalist Legions, and this time I want to talk about the traitors. Like last time, I'll talk a bit about what unit types will make a difference for each Legion trait, and try to consider what the best units might be and how to use the different legions effectively. I have to have a disclaimer that, we haven't seen everything yet, haven't actually had a look at all the detailed rules. Probably have to do this again later, but I know a lot of people want to start thinking about their legions before the box set comes out. And this is just my thoughts to help with that thought process. Probably not going to get everything correct. Or have all the best ideas. I'm not renowned as a tactical genius, but it will get the thoughts flowing, and hopefully for me and for you. I'll also think about what traits will work best as sort of the dominant part of the list's trait, and versus what might be best for just one or two formations. Maybe about what goes best in an allied list or with allies, if you want to think about solar auxilia and stuff like that. I do think that might be an even harder question. So, getting started with Traitor Legion number 1 is the Emperor's Children, whose trait is Exemplars of War. Now, this allows them to automatically win the initiative once per game. So they'll get to fire first, move first, etc, etc. Now, whilst this is a fairly good trait, I hate it. You need one formation to gain this rule. And once you have it, you have it. Having more formations of Emperor's Children doesn't gain you anything extra. And the really stupid part is that if you take a minimum strength formation, it allows you to simply use your Death Guard or your World Eaters or whoever else to act first. It doesn't even have to be the Emperor's Children who actually act first. If you said you could only apply this to allow Emperor's Children themselves to go first in each phase automatically, or something within 6 inches of Emperor's Children detachment, at least you'd actually have to have enough Emperor's Children to have a bit of flexibility around the battlefield to make use of this. Even worse is the fact that if you take Emperor's Children as allies, you only get to re-roll this rather than automatically win the initiative. So if you have 900 points of Emperor's Children allied to Solar Auxilia, you get less advantage than if you have a single Emperor's Children formation alongside mostly World Eaters and 900 points of allies Auxilia. It just doesn't make sense. It's not a bad trait, but it's badly designed. It makes me sad that it's actually making people think about their list building in this way. And basically anyone who uses an entirely Emperor's Children army is deliberately playing at a disadvantage. But also, if you don't have at least one Emperor's Children formation, you might be playing at a bit of disadvantage. It's just not something that makes me feel good about the way the rules are going to interact. Our second Traitor Legion is the Iron Warriors, who get Bitter End. This makes their infantry and walkers count their tactical strength as 1 higher when they're trying to gain control of a neutral objective. Now that sounds to me like they're going to be better at gaining control of an objective in the first place, but once they gain control of it, they'd actually lose their benefit the next turn? Or does it mean that once someone else has control of it, they gain no advantage trying to take it from them? Or I wonder if neutral objective means something else in this context to what we'd be used to, such as an objective that's not in anyone's deployment zone. And I wonder that because they can also count their tactical strength as 2 higher for those infantry and walkers in a deployment zone, but only their own deployment zone. Now, that part does sound very important as well, because it sounds like you're going to be able to retain control of your own objective whilst freeing up more forces to move forward onto other objectives. Ironically, I think that will actually result in the fact that if you have an Iron Warriors list and nothing else with them, they're going to want to move forward in a very mobile way. They won't need to leave lots of things in their backfield at home to defend their base like some legions will do. And that kind of feels counterintuitive, but it's certainly strong. Iron Warriors are certainly going to be good at missions where they can sit back to deny the enemy their home objective and win by grinding out a mess in the middle of the table. And perhaps we'll see formations of Iron Warriors sitting in their backfield or moving up the table, whilst more aggressive legions have formations moving up towards those enemy deployment zones. Night Lords, third of our Traitor Legion, gets Seeds of Descent. And I love this one. I've got to say, though, it seems a trifle situational. If your Night Lords kill an enemy commander, enemy detachments within 4 inches take a number of hits equal to 3 times his starting wound characteristic. And instead of armor saves, each model makes a save using the morale value and don't get the benefits of cover, etc., etc. Now, as infantry commanders start with just 1 wound, I don't think there's going to be much benefit to this unless and until we see multi-wound commanders, whether that be special characters, Primarchs, who knows. With a morale save of 3+ for your Marines, that means you'll typically get 1 extra kill if you can get the commander, and if their units around them are still alive, and if you can actually kill him once you get to him. You'll get an occasional small benefit here if you just let it happen as a natural part of the battle, but Night Lords, in large parts, if they are the only force you have, are going to be fighting with no particular rules, and you'll just be hoping for a one-off teeny tiny bonus. And it certainly won't make it worth tailoring your list to hunt down the enemy's handful of commanders, because they're probably only going to have a small number. Even doing this alongside Solo Auxilia is not going to have a huge amount of impact. Number 4, though, World Eaters. Wow. Khorne's boys get Incarnate Violence, which allows them to reroll 1 dice in combat. That seems incredible. It doesn't apply to vehicles, quite sensibly, but it makes everything else in your army a credible threat against even the strongest combatants in the opponent's army. It's hard to say yet how much combat will matter compared to shooting, but this is clearly already the top combat force in the game. And you'd expect that. It wouldn't be making sense if they were anything other than the main combat threat, the way they're always written about in the fluff. 5th, we have the Death Guard with their Sons of Barbarous trait, which means that all Death Guard models ignore dangerous terrain. Now, that's not terrible on the right table, but the interesting bit is that if you have any formations of Death Guard, you get to make 2 sections of terrain dangerous, or you can make 2 structures dangerous instead of 1 terrain section. And that certainly sounds useful, but once again, it's a one-off benefit for having 1 or more formations. There's very little reason to take more than 1 formation of them. Choose your 1 formation, make one side of the table very dangerous, and put all your Death Guard there. Put your single Emperor's Children formation on the other flank, well away from the dangerous terrain, and seize the initiative. Then use your seized initiative to move your single formation of Iron Warriors onto a neutral objective, and something just feels a little bit dirty about that, right? And yet it's encouraged by the rules. Honestly, the Emperor's Children and Death Guard rules are questionable enough to make me hope the traits that we're being given are placeholder traits, and they'll be replaced with more rounded traits at some later date. I mean, this trait is not bad in the sense of how advantageous it is, but it's bad in the sense of how it will affect army design, to the detriment of anyone daft enough to place certain legions as their only legion. Right. Let me calm down and get on to number 6 for the traitors. This is the Thousand Sons. And I'm pretty sure they don't get Kine shields. I'm pretty sure they get Kinney shields, as in kinetic. I don't know. It just sounds like it should be Kinney shields. I don't know what everyone else thinks. And that counts as a 6+ field generator for commanders. Now, that will, as I understand it from the rules for shield generator drop pods, give all models in the commander's detachment a 6+ invulnerable save. That's not awful, but there's not many commanders to go round, so not all detachments from each formation will be protected. I'd be interested to see how this works as well with the little extensions that you can add to some of the detachments, where you can add extra Terminators, extra assault squads, etc., etc. It might feel tempting to make some really powerful detachments, and that might mean you land up with some unwieldy blobs of infantry just for the sake of getting a 6+ save. The actual unwieldiness might be a bigger problem than the benefit of the 6+ save. A lot might depend on whether we see different commanders for different unit types later as releases carry on, And, you know, maybe that's the thing that's going to make a difference for Night Lords as well. Maybe we're seeing a very incomplete rule set right now. Sons of Horus, the 7th Legion today, get Death Dealers. And when they have advance orders and are within 6 inches of the enemy, they will reroll 1s when they use light and light anti-tank weapons. The flavour of that certainly works. You want Horus and his boys in green for now, black soon. We want them to feel like an in-your-face legion that are going to mix it up close to the enemy. It seems odd that they're worse at shooting when they're on first fires, though. I'm going to try and justify in my head that it's not so much about being better shots when they advance, but they're good at finding good firing positions and pinning the enemy into disadvantageous positions whilst they're on the move. I think we can just about make that make sense. Now, this one applies to all models, not just one type. It's not just infantry or cavalry or something. So it could be one of the most powerful traits out there. It's not going to help your anti-tank weapons, but you'll have a definite advantage over your enemy's infantry and other light units. There's one thing I want to pick up on with the Sons of Horus. Most legions, though not all of them by any means, have rules in 8mm and 28mm scale that seem at least vaguely related. Here, though, we have a legion that gets a survivability bonus in combat at 28mm, but a killing bonus at range, admittedly short range, but 8mm scale. I know that a lot of people want to run the same legion in both scales and possibly even feel like they're using the same army, and they might not like the fact that the feel is so different between scales for some region. In White Dwarf, we've already had a campaign where you can play a little bit of one game, a little bit of another game, and the results from your Horus Heresy game or Aeronautica game or even your Adeptus Titanicus game might affect your Epic game. And to use your Sons of Horus from the same army in 2 different ways might feel odd. Nearly at the end, in 8th place for the traitors, Word Bearers get True Believers. They never count as broken for the purpose of giving orders, and they ignore Dread Auras. I'm assuming Dread Auras is something to do with demons, but the ability to choose your orders even when broken sounds very useful. I assume that if you actually fail a morale test, you'll still go on to fall back, but having a free choice of orders whilst broken does sound very advantageous. Alpha Legion, our final Traitor Legion, get mutable tactics. And for the first time, and it's the last Legion, but for the first time, we have a Legion that only gets its benefit if the whole primary part of the army is Alpha Legion, or is the same Legion. Why this limitation applies to Alpha Legion and no one else is a little bit beyond me. If 2,100 points of Alpha Legion have 900 points of Solar Auxilia allies, they get mutable tactics. But if 2,905 points of Alpha Legion are joined by 95 points of Sons of Horus, the Alpha Legion suddenly forget how to be quite as sneaky. Okay. I mean, if they've done that for narrative reasons, it doesn't make sense to me. If they've done it for rules reasons to prevent Alpha Legion being too powerful, I don't see how that fixes the problem anyway. Again, it's just making army building strange. And there's other legions out there with very, very good abilities. Anyway, what does mutable tactics actually do? Well, if the Alpha Legion are the main part of the army, each formation of Alpha Legion gets to upgrade 3 detachments. They can give outflank, infiltrate, or forward deployment to detachments of infantry, walker, cavalry, or vehicle, or just forward deployment to anything else. So I assume that means Alpha Legion flyers. If the Alpha Legion are there as allies to Solar Auxilia, they only get to do this for 1 detachment in each formation. Again, that seems fairly arbitrary. Alpha Legion are super sneaky when they bring along Auxilia allies, but only fairly sneaky when they are allies to the Auxilia. I mean, hell, based on the Horus Heresy novels like Legion, they ought to be the other way round. The Alpha Legion are at their best when they're not the main force. They're actually sneakier in that situation. Anyway, Alpha Legion do seem really, really powerful. Oh, unless they're fighting Space Wolves and then they get nothing. And at least that does mean they're just on level terms with the Wolves who get nothing else either. If I weren't so set on Blood Angels for this game, I'd be tempted to do Alpha Legion just to stick 2 fingers up at the game's designers. Not that I'd achieve anything by doing so. As I say, I really hope these are placeholder traits and they get updated as more and more things come out for the game. But let's think about how these things all work overall. The traitor lists compared to the traits for loyalists, do seem to be a bit more extreme. I covered them in my last video, and I also spoke about whether they work best in regards to single formations or whether they're the only legion in a list. So I'll go through it in the same way here and try and refer back to loyalists a little bit as well. Emperor's Children obviously have no reason to use them as anything more than one formation in your army. Death Guard, on the other hand, have slightly more reason to use them as your only force, but they each bring something very useful to the army as a whole. I wouldn't want to describe them as complete write-offs, and a lot of people will want to use lists made up entirely of one of those legions, but I really hope something in a future release offers players a better reason to make a force of just one of those legions, and that those players are rewarded for making that choice early on. For now, though, they'll be good to use alongside legions that will be the dominant part of a list, such as World Eaters with an amazing trait across the entire army, or Word Bearers with a less obvious benefit, but one that would be watered down if there's just one formation of them that the enemy can focus fire on. I can see huge potential for the Emperor's Children fighting as loyalists alongside a legion like the Blood Angels, who might really need that initiative to get the charge right to maximize their utility for their Fight Twice ability, or to give you an advantage first firing Imperial Fist's infantry, perhaps to shoot a Titan to take that last wound before it can open up and wipe out your super heavies, or kill some infantry before they charge yours and pin it in place. Your Blood Angels can't charge if they're already charged, for example. This whole line of reasoning upsets me, though, as it's not about taking Emperor's Children because they are good or because they are cool or because you like purple, but it's because it's trying to make your actual army that you really want better. I'd feel quite guilty about taking some Emperor's Children just to make my Blood Angels a little bit better. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Another legion that seemed to be best brought as just one detachment seems to be Night Lords. I mean, there's just not going to be enough commanders to go round to make much use of that Night Lord's ability to inspire fear by killing commanders. But maybe one small formation, a mobile formation dedicated to that job that can move around the board taking out commanders, might get some utility. I mean, as I already mentioned, I don't think it's a powerful ability, but at least it would be thematic and give you a way of thinking about the strategy of your army. And having a bunch of bloodthirsty killers with lightning striking down their armor on the fringe of everyone else's battle, and they're just there to swoop in and commit some atrocities, does even feel a little bit thematic for the Night Lords. They weren't one for actually engaging in a pitched battle unless they absolutely had to, after all. Now, World Eaters and Word Bearers, I've already mentioned, are obvious choices for the main focus of an army, possibly even on their own as the only elements you have in an army. World Eaters' combat ability means that depending on how you want to build your list and what tactics you want to use, you might be best off sticking to just World Eaters. A lack of supporting firepower might hurt you. Word Bearers have an ability that is similar. It might only become meaningful if it's happening in several places around the board, and your enemy can't just focus fire to deal with that one troublesome formation that they just have to get rid of because it won't go away. And Alpha Legion, as I've already ranted about, clearly need to be the only Marines you use if you use them at all. Now, I think Thousand Suns will work slightly better as the main part of an army rather than as support. If they have lots of formations, they'll have a few more commanders to give out their kidney field saves. And if you only have a few detachments within each of those many formations, but each of them is a big detachment, it will emphasize the benefits of that 6+ kidney field save. If you only have one formation of Thousand Suns, your opponent can choose which weapons to fire at which detachments in your army to minimize the benefits of your kidney shields by deciding where to shoot different AP modifying weapons, and it's not going to work very well. They can just use light weapons with those on kidney shields and light anti-tank weapons on those without them to strip them of their saves without just giving an invulnerable save instead. If most units in your army have that 6+ kidney save, though, your opponent will find it harder to make such choices, and you might actually be able to save a higher percentage of your army. I don't think it's going to save you much of your army, but it might be just enough to keep a detachment alive before it breaks or it just gets entirely wiped out, and make that last-ditch difference. So that's 4 legions that will work best as the larger part of your army, or possibly your entire army, and 3 that will just be best as possibly a single formation if you really want to maximize the power of your army. And that brings us to a couple of legions that will probably work best in tandem with other people. But it is hard to decide the ratio, and it might actually vary from army to army depending on what tactics you want to use and exactly what models you want to take. So a core of Iron Warriors sitting back or advancing up to the middle of the table to hold objectives, supported by World Eaters to do the actual fighting, or Death Guard to plunge through dangerous terrain that's getting in the enemy's way but not theirs, seems like a better option than just pure Iron Warriors. Also Iron Warriors sitting back and providing firepower for World Eaters seems obvious. Another option that would pair up better, possibly with Iron Warriors again, than they would do on their own, is Sons of Horus. They might be best off as the advanced part of an army, part of a different legion sitting back and defending home territory, and freeing up the boys from Chthoniya to run amok upfield somewhere in the middle of the table or towards the enemy's deployment zone. Those two do feel like natural partners in terms of both the lore and the rules. An amusing option for some people might be to ally Sons of Horus with Imperial Fists. There is even a strange precedent for that. On Chthoniya, as we saw in the Siege of Chthoniya supplement for our 28mm version of this, there were Imperial Fists who recruited from Chthonian kill gangs. Is there anyone out there who fancies painting up a traditional Imperial Fists formation in yellow, then another slight variant on an Imperial Fists colour, which will still stand out on the table, represent the fact that the second formation of Imperial Fists are actually Chthonian? Use the Sons of Horus rules to represent that? I mean, it might be fun. Seems a bit cheesy, but, justifiable in the fluff. Importantly, though, Sons of Horus did actually fight alongside many other legions, and their 28mm rule represent that as well. So I think Sons of Horus as part of a buffet list. I think buffet list sounds nicer than a soup list, by the way. I think a buffet list of Sons of Horus, let's make that a thing, everyone, does actually make sense. I've gone through this and I've actually put together a little table of my thoughts on who works best alone and with other people, who they might work best with. It's not an exhaustive list, it's just my first initial thoughts, and there's lots of different ideas. Rather than talk through this and repeat myself here, though, I'll let you just pause for a minute if you want to actually look at this and comment below. More importantly than the rules, though, I think I'd rather think about the fluff for a minute. And there are some obvious combinations that make sense completely based on the fluff. A force of Lorgar's Wordbearers alongside Angron's World Eaters would be amazing to see. That would make complete sense as we think about the beginning of the Ruin Storm and how Lorgar was thinking about trying to save Angron and all that sort of thing. Slightly after that in the fluff, we could talk about an Imperium Secundus force, Ultramarines, Blood Angels, Dark Angels, Barabbas Dantioc's Loyalist Iron Warriors, and the Imperial Fists of Alexis Pollux all worked together at different stages. And it would look really good to have some of those things. I don't know if you'd want to squeeze in all 5 of them, but it certainly wouldn't hurt to have Blood Angels and Imperial Fists, or Blood Angels and Iron Warriors. The Shattered Legions forces of Raven Guard, Iron Hands, and Salamanders would be amazing. A formation of Traitor White Scars dashing in from the flanks to support the grinding advance of Sons of Horus would be very thematic based on what we know about the internal politics of the White Scars Legion, as some of the forces there tried to persuade their Primarch that they should be joining the traitors rather than staying loyal to the Emperor. Loyalist Thousand Sons fought with Raven Guard and Imperial Fists on Chthoniya, and against the combined forces of Wordbearers and Sons of Horus when they did so. Iron Warriors and Emperor's Children had a somewhat uneasy relationship due to the events of Angel Exterminatus, but it actually offers an interesting narrative for an army if you chose to put them together. I think what I'm getting at is that I don't object to the idea of a buffet list, but I would like there to be some thought behind it and a bit of thematic justification for it. And after all, people could just build a force of each and build more than they need, and sometimes combine forces, sometimes not. And actually that might be, perfectly justified. We don't have to build one exact army and stick to it forever. I often mix up my Alpha Legion and Mechanicus in Horus Heresy. Sometimes I use just a Mechanicus, sometimes I use just Alpha Legion, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Now, finally, this time, I want to talk about the Solar Auxilia a little bit, based on some comments people made on the last video. I am not well versed in the Auxilia yet, and I'll probably try to find out more about them and make another video about them. But my first assumption is that Auxilia will be about either tanks or about massed infantry. And obviously, you know, you could go halfway and just do a bit of each, but generally one or the other is probably going to be the best option. Now, using Auxilia as allies for either Raven Guard or Alpha Legion would be incredibly thematic. Raven Guard have always worked alongside other forces and supported them. And the same exact thing is true for the Alpha Legion. In the fluff, in the rules, both of these legions have, you know, ways that can work. Similarly, close combat legions, such as Blood Angels or World Eaters, or maneuverable armies like White Scars, might want to use Auxilia to provide their stable backline instead of another legion list. If you don't want to use Iron Warriors, then a whole bunch of Malcador tanks or Lehman Russes might fill that role for you instead. And if you have a more infantry-based Auxilia force, it might be best to have an Astartes one that can provide a bit of a spine. Word bearers would be very thematic for this, and their rules actually, you know, work in that way as well. Having the word bearers stick around and you know, keep the Auxilia in line, if it were. I know there's no rules for that, but in terms of how you're thinking about it, it could work. Salamanders could fill a similar role for loyalists. World Eaters or Sons of Horus could provide a bit of bite that Auxilia lack as they move forwards, whilst also gaining protection from those lesser troops around them. And even if you have the, I forget the exact name of them, but the Auxilia with the axes, who somehow seem to be better at combat than any Space Marines ever, you know, it still might be thematic. Death Guard with Auxilia might not work. In some ways, because you'd expect all of the Auxilia just to drop dead from some nasty illnesses. But, you know, you could still have the Death Guard on one side of the table, the Auxilia on the other, and even possibly put the Auxilia behind the protection of the Death Guard's dangerous terrain. And that might help them quite a lot. Like I said, I think that's one for me to explore further in another video, but that's just my initial thoughts. It goes without saying that it'd be nice if you would leave a comment. It's actually nothing to do with beating the algorithm. It's just it makes me feel good. I get that little dopamine hit from knowing that someone else has subscribed or someone has commented or someone has even just watched it and switched off after 30 seconds. Give me a thumbs up, give me a like, all that sort of stuff. I love it. I'll see you soon. I'll try and do another video within the next few days because it's Wednesday and we should hopefully start getting our boxes this weekend. And I'll hopefully have something to say about building my models. I'm going to try and do what Richard Gray did on his latest video of getting rid of some of the worst of the overhang of the plastics and make my models look better from every angle. But for now, I'm going to go away and build some more terrain. I've got some from Troublemaker Games to have a look at, and I've got some from Kyblams or Kiblams. I should actually check how he pronounces it. That I'm going to build, and hopefully soon I'll have a video where I show you what I've done to build a table to actually play this game on. So thank you very much. Goodbye. I'll see you soon. Take care.